The rain didn't so much fall as it assaulted the city, a relentless silver barrage that turned the afternoon sky to a bruised twilight. It hammered on the immaculate, hand-polished roof of the 1958 Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud, a car known to its owner, Alistair Finch, as the Monarch. At that moment, the Monarch was anything but regal. It was dead. Utterly, infuriatingly, and expensively dead, stalled in a puddle that was quickly aspiring to be a lake on a street Alistair couldn't even be bothered to name. Every metallic ping of the cooling engine was a fresh insult. He slammed his hand against the leather-wrapped steering wheel, the sound absorbed by the opulent interior. "Incompetent fools," he seethed, the words directed at the ghost of his chief mechanic, who had assured him the vintage beast was in perfect fettle only that morning. It was then that he saw it. A small movement in the side mirror, a flash of canary yellow against the relentless gray of the downpour. A child's raincoat. A tiny hand, no bigger than one of his imported cigars, reached out from under the car's massive chrome-plated grille. The hand held up a single, grimy black wire with a frayed copper end, holding it with the solemnity of a knight presenting a holy relic. A small face, framed by a dripping yellow hood, peeked around the fender. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with eyes the color of moss after a storm, looked directly at him. Her voice, miraculously clear over the drumming rain, pierced the bubble of his fury. "Mister," she said, with the simple gravity of a prophet, "I think this is your problem." Alistair Finch did not deal with problems. He delegated them, buried them in money, or litigated them out of existence. He certainly didn't discuss them with street urchins in the middle of a biblical flood. He stared at the girl, a creature so out of place in his world she might as well have been an alien. He pressed the button to lower the thick-paned window a few inches, the whisper-quiet servo motor a stark contrast to the engine's sullen silence. "What did you say?" he demanded, his voice accustomed to rattling boardrooms, not conversing with children. The girl didn't flinch. She stepped closer, the puddle sloshing over her worn-out rain boots. "This," she repeated, holding the wire higher. "It's the primary ignition lead to the distributor cap. My daddy said on these old V8s, the vibration can sometimes work it loose. It's not getting the spark signal. The engine can turn over all day, but the heart won't know when to beat." She spoke the words with a practiced certainty that was utterly absurd. It was like watching a toddler discourse on quantum physics. Alistair felt a bubble of disbelief rise in his chest, so potent and so foreign that it came out as a short, sharp bark of a laugh. It was a condescending, dismissive sound, the kind of laugh he used to crush the spirit of a junior executive who dared to present a flawed quarterly projection. "The heart won't know when to beat," he echoed, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "And I suppose you're the car doctor who's going to perform open-heart surgery right here on the street." The girl's brow furrowed, not in intimidation, but in genuine confusion at his tone. "You don't need surgery," she said, as if explaining something obvious to a slow learner. "You just need to plug it back in. It's easy." Alistair's smirk widened. "Oh, it's easy, is it? And how would a little girl in a yellow raincoat know the first thing about a vintage Rolls-Royce engine?" The girl's chin lifted a fraction. "My daddy was a mechanic," she said, a quiet pride in her voice that was as solid and unyielding as the dead engine block in front of them. "He taught me. He said all machines tell you what's wrong with them if you just learn how to listen." Alistair's amusement was turning to irritation. His multi-million-dollar masterpiece, the pinnacle of British engineering, was being diagnosed by a child quoting workshop folklore. He had a team of specialists on speed dial, men who charged more per hour than this girl's entire family probably made in a year. He had already called them, of course. The first, his personal mechanic, was stuck in traffic across town. The second, the official Rolls-Royce Heritage Service, had condescendingly informed him that their bespoke retrieval service had a 4-hour minimum wait time and would cost a small fortune. He was stranded, he was wet, and he was being lectured by a pipsqueak. "Listen, kid," he snapped, his patience evaporating into the humid air. "I appreciate the diagnosis, but I think I'll wait for a professional. Now run along before you catch a cold." He pressed the button to raise the window, the glass humming upwards to seal him back in his silent, leather-lined tomb. But before it closed, the girl's small voice cut through again, tinged with an ounce of frustration. "But it's just right there. You're just sitting there being broken when you don't have to be." The window sealed shut, cutting off her words. Alistair leaned his head back against the plush headrest, closing his eyes. Broken. The word echoed in the sudden silence. He was Alistair Finch. Nothing in his life was broken. Anything that malfunctioned was replaced, immediately and without sentiment. His watches, his staff, his relationships. And yet, here he was, sitting in a broken-down car, in a broken-down part of the city, with a storm raging around him as if the world itself were broken. He opened his eyes and looked at the girl. She hadn't moved. She was just standing there in the rain, a small, stubborn beacon of yellow, still holding the disconnected wire. Her expression wasn't angry or defeated. It was patient. She was waiting for him to learn how to listen. A wave of something unfamiliar washed over him. Not anger, not frustration, but a deep, profound sense of the absurd. What did he have to lose? His dignity? He was sitting in a puddle on a forgotten street. His pride was already taking a beating. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his entire portfolio, he opened the heavy door and stepped out into the deluge. The rain was colder than he expected, instantly soaking the shoulders of his bespoke suit jacket. The fine Italian wool, designed to command respect, now clung to him like a wet shroud. He strode to the front of the car, his handmade leather shoes squelching in the grimy water. The girl watched his approach, her expression unreadable. "Show me," Alistair said, the words feeling alien on his tongue. He had never asked for help in his life, not really. He had only ever commanded service. The girl's face brightened. She pointed a small, slightly greasy finger towards the engine bay. "There," she said. "See that round thing with all the other black wires coming out of it? That's the distributor cap. It's like the post office. It sends the mail, the spark, to the right house at the right time. Your wire is the mail truck. And it's not at the post office." Alistair peered into the complex labyrinth of the engine. He saw 1,000 gleaming, incomprehensible parts. He had owned this car for 15 years, a legacy from his father, but he'd never once looked under the hood. He paid people for that. Following her finger, he saw the cap she described, and he saw the empty socket, a small brass nub waiting for a connection. It looked so simple, so obvious now that she'd pointed it out. "All right," he grumbled, trying to maintain some semblance of authority. "Give it to me." He reached for the wire, but the girl pulled it back slightly. "You have to push it on until it clicks," she instructed seriously. "If it's not a snug fit, it'll just fall off again the next time you hit a bump." Alistair snatched the wire from her, feeling a ridiculous flush of embarrassment. He, Alistair Finch, was being schooled in basic mechanics by a child. He leaned over the fender, the rain dripping from his nose, and tried to fit the wire's connector onto the brass nub. His large manicured fingers, accustomed to signing checks and shaking hands, were clumsy and awkward. The connector slipped. He tried again, gritting his teeth. On the third try, he pushed harder and was rewarded with a satisfying, tactile click. It was a small sound, almost lost in the storm, but it felt momentous. He straightened up, wiping his wet hands on his now ruined trousers. "There," he said, as if he'd accomplished a great feat. Happy? The girl wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the car, her head tilted. Now try, she said. It should work. Alistair stalked back to the driver's door, dripping a trail of rainwater onto the fine Wilton carpet. He slid behind the wheel, the wet leather cold against his back. He felt a surge of skepticism. It couldn't be this simple. His world wasn't simple. Problems were complex. Solutions were expensive. Simple was for other people. He took a deep breath, inserted the key, and turned. The engine coughed once, sputtered, and then roared to life with a deep, throaty purr that vibrated through the very soul of the car. It was the most beautiful sound Alistair had ever heard. For a full 10 seconds, he just sat there, listening to the steady, powerful rhythm of the resurrected V8. He looked through the rain-streaked windshield at the little girl. She was beaming, a wide, gap-toothed smile that lit up the gray afternoon. She gave him 2 enthusiastic thumbs up. The sheer, unadulterated joy on her face was jarring. She wasn't expecting payment or reward. She was just happy that the broken thing was fixed. Alistair felt that strange sensation again, that cracking of a cynical shell he hadn't even known was there. He lowered the window again. The engine's purr was a warm, reassuring counterpoint to the storm. "Thank you," he said. The words felt rusty, as if they hadn't been used in years. "You're welcome," the girl chirped. "I'm Lily." "Alistair," he replied automatically. He reached for his wallet, a reflex born of a lifetime of solving every situation with cash. He pulled out a thick fold of bills, peeling off several large ones without even looking at the denomination. "Here," he said, holding the money out the window. "For your trouble." Lily looked at the money, then back at his face. Her smile vanished, replaced by that same look of profound confusion. "What's that for?" she asked. "It's for you," Alistair said, a little impatiently. "For fixing the car. You earned it." Lily shook her head, her wet pigtails slapping against her raincoat. "My daddy said you don't take money for helping someone who's stuck. Helping is not a job. It's just what you do." Alistair was floored. He had never encountered a transaction he couldn't complete. The entire world, as he knew it, operated on the principle of quid pro quo. You provide a service, you get paid. He was offering a more than generous payment, and this child was refusing it on a point of principle. "Don't be ridiculous," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. "Everyone takes money. Take it." He pushed the bills towards her again. Lily took a step back, her expression clouding over. She looked hurt. "I don't want it," she said, her voice small but firm. "You already said thank you. That's the payment." A sudden, fierce gust of wind drove the rain sideways, and a horn blared from a car that had appeared behind the rolls. The real world was reasserting itself. Alistair looked from the girl's stubborn, principled face to the traffic. He had to go. He was already late for a meeting he now had no intention of attending. He felt a bizarre impulse, a need to not let this strange, confounding interaction end this way. "Wait," he said. He looked around at the run-down storefronts and the grim-looking apartment buildings. "Where do you live?" Lily hesitated, a flicker of stranger danger caution finally appearing in her eyes. "Just over there," she said, gesturing vaguely with her head towards a brick building with a leaking gutter. "With my mom." "Right," Alistair said, his mind racing. He retracted the money, stuffing the damp bills back into his wallet. The rejection stung more than he cared to admit. "Well, thank you again, Lily." He gave her a stiff, awkward nod, then raised the window for the final time. He put the car in gear, the transmission engaging with a smooth, satisfying clunk. As he pulled away from the curb, he looked in the rearview mirror. Lily was still standing there, a small yellow figure growing smaller and smaller until the rain in the city swallowed her up completely. Alistair drove for 10 blocks, the car running perfectly, the purr of the engine a constant reminder of the absurdity of the last 20 minutes. He was Alistair Finch, a man who moved markets and commanded empires, and he had just been comprehensively outmaneuvered, diagnosed, and repaired by an 8-year-old girl who refused to take his money. He couldn't stop thinking about her words. Helping is not a job. It's just what you do. It was a philosophy so alien to his own that it might as well have been in a different language. His entire life was a job. Every interaction was a negotiation, every relationship a balance sheet of assets and liabilities. He tried to dismiss it, to file the encounter away under urban oddities, but it wouldn't stick. The image of her proud, stubborn little face, the feel of the wire clicking into place, the sound of her voice explaining the heart of the machine. It all looped in his mind. He was supposed to be at a dinner, a gala for some charity he didn't care about, a place where he would be surrounded by people who would smile at him, flatter him, and want something from him. The thought, which just that morning had been a tedious obligation, now felt utterly unbearable. On impulse, he turned the rolls down a side street, then another, circling the block until he found himself back on the same dreary road where he had stalled. He parked across the street from the brick building Lily had pointed to, the engine idling like a contented lion. He didn't know what he was doing. This was not his way. He was an analyst, a strategist. He didn't do impulsive, but he sat there for a long time, watching the lights flicker on in the windows of the apartment building as the storm-darkened evening bled into true night, the rhythmic sweep of his windshield wipers counting out a question he didn't know how to ask. The next morning, Alistair summoned his executive assistant, Evelyn, to his penthouse office. Evelyn was a woman in her late 40s, hyper-competent, impeccably dressed, and possessing a placid demeanor that had remained unruffled by Alistair's notoriously mercurial temperament for over a decade. She was less an assistant and more a curator of his life. "I have a task for you," Alistair said, forgoing any pleasantries. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city he owned a significant portion of. "It's delicate." Evelyn poised her pen over her notepad, her expression unchanged. "Of course, Mr. Finch. Yesterday, my car broke down on—" He paused, trying to recall the name of the street. It hadn't seemed important at the time. It was in the industrial sector, near the old cannery district. "I need you to find someone for me." He described Lily, her yellow raincoat, her approximate age. He described the brick apartment building. He did not, however, describe the circumstances of their meeting. "I want to know everything," he commanded. "Her name, her family situation, school, everything. And Evelyn," he added, turning to face her, "absolute discretion. No one is to know I am asking. This is not a corporate matter. It is a personal one." A flicker of surprise, so minute it was almost imperceptible, crossed Evelyn's face. Alistair Finch did not have personal matters that required this level of investigation. His personal life was a series of scheduled appearances and pre-nuptial agreements. "Understood, Mr. Finch," she said, making a few swift notes. Within 24 hours, Evelyn had a file on his desk. Her efficiency was legendary. The file was thin, but the details within it were stark. The girl's name was Lily Shepherd, age 9. She lived with her mother, Sarah Shepherd, in apartment 3B of the building he had watched. Sarah was a widow. She worked 2 jobs, a day shift as a waitress at a diner and an evening shift cleaning office buildings. They were 3 months behind on rent. Lily's father, Daniel Shepherd, had died a year and a half ago. Cause of death: a sudden, massive heart attack. He had been 42. And then came the line that made Alistair's blood run cold. Daniel Shepherd's last place of employment, a senior mechanic at Sterling Auto Parts, a subsidiary of Finch Consolidated. Alistair sat back in his chair, the file feeling impossibly heavy in his hands. He owned Sterling Auto Parts. It was a small, unglamorous cog in his vast corporate machine, a company he had acquired in a larger deal and had barely thought about since. He had fired this girl's father, or at least his company had. He buzzed for Evelyn. "Get me the complete employment record for a Daniel Shepard from Sterling Auto Parts," he ordered, his voice tight, "including termination details." Another file appeared an hour later. It was thicker. Daniel Shepard had been fired for insubordination and violation of company policy. He had repeatedly raised concerns about the quality of a specific line of brake pads being manufactured in one of their overseas factories. He claimed they were made with substandard materials and were prone to premature failure. He had bypassed his direct supervisor and sent a detailed, multi-page memo directly to the division head. He was fired 2 days later. The division head at the time had been an ambitious young executive named Marcus Thorne. Thorne was now the COO of Finch Consolidated, Alistair's second in command. Alistair stared at the name, a sick feeling coiling in his stomach. Marcus was aggressive, ruthless, and brilliant at maximizing profits. He was everything Alistair valued in an executive. He had also, it seemed, fired a brilliant mechanic for trying to prevent a potential disaster. A man who had then died, leaving his wife and daughter in poverty. A daughter who had fixed Alistair's car on the side of the road. The sheer, damning circularity of it was staggering. This wasn't an urban oddity. It was a reckoning. His first instinct, the one honed by years of corporate damage control, was to make it go away. He would have Evelyn arrange for an anonymous donation to be made to the Shepard family, enough to cover their rent for a year, maybe more. He would have a trust set up for Lily's education. He would solve the problem with money from a safe distance, and then he would forget about it. It was the clean, efficient solution. But he couldn't do it. He thought of Lily's face, the pride in her voice when she said, "My daddy was a mechanic." He thought of her refusal of his money, her simple, unshakable belief that helping was just what you do. To simply throw money at her felt like a profound insult to her, to the memory of her father. It was a continuation of the same corporate arrogance that had gotten Daniel Shepard fired in the first place. Dismiss the problem, pay it off, move on. He closed the file. He knew what he had to do, and he hated it. He hated it because it was messy, it was personal, and it required something of him that had nothing to do with his wealth or his power. He was going to have to get involved. His first attempt was a disaster. Acting on some misguided paternalistic impulse, he had a delivery sent to their apartment from the most exclusive organic grocer in the city. It was an absurd amount of food. Artisanal cheeses, exotic fruits, prime cuts of meat, things he imagined a struggling family would appreciate. The next day, Evelyn informed him that the entire delivery had been left untouched outside their door and was eventually taken by other residents of the building. His second attempt was even more clumsy. He had Evelyn contact the building's landlord, a faceless management company, and pay their overdue rent as well as the next 6 months in advance, all under the guise of a charitable housing fund. 2 days later, a formal letter arrived at his office, forwarded from the management company. It was from Sarah Shepard. It was written in a neat, clear hand on simple-lined paper. To whom it may concern, it began. While I do not know the source of this sudden charity, I cannot accept it. My husband and I have always paid our own way. I will continue to do so. I have instructed the management company to refuse the payment. Please direct your generosity to those who are truly in need. The letter was polite, proud, and utterly dismissive. It was a rejection, as clean and firm as her daughter's. Alistair crumpled the paper in his fist. Who were these people? Didn't they understand how the world worked? When someone offered you a lifeline, you took it. You didn't write a thank you but no thank you note. He was trying to help, to atone for a wrong he hadn't even known his company had committed, and he was failing spectacularly. He realized the problem. He was still trying to fix things from a distance, using money as his tool. He was treating the Shepherds like a line item on a balance sheet, an account to be settled. But Lily hadn't fixed his car with money. She had gotten her hands dirty. She had listened. He knew he couldn't just show up at their door. He was the man in the Rolls Royce, the living embodiment of the wealth and power that had crushed their family. So he devised a new plan, one that felt both strategic and deeply foolish. He found out from Evelyn which park Lily played in after school while her mother was between shifts. The next afternoon, he found himself sitting on a park bench, dressed not in a suit, but in a pair of expensive jeans and a cashmere sweater that still managed to look out of place among the worn-out playground equipment. He felt like an anthropologist observing a foreign tribe. He brought a prop, a complex, beautiful, antique mechanical puzzle box he'd owned for years. It was a series of interlocking gears and levers that, if manipulated in the correct sequence, would open to reveal a small, empty compartment. He had never been able to solve it. He sat there, fiddling with it, feeling self-conscious and ridiculous. After about 20 minutes, he saw her. She was on the swings, her bright yellow coat a familiar splash of color. She was laughing, pumping her small legs to go higher and higher. The sound of her pure, unburdened joy was a punch to the gut. Eventually, she slowed down, hopped off the swing, and began wandering towards his bench, her curiosity apparently piqued by the strange man with the strange object. She stopped a few feet away, watching him. "What's that?" she asked. Alistair looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh, hello again," he said, trying to sound casual. "It's a puzzle box. It's supposed to open, but I can't seem to figure it out." Lily stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the intricate brass mechanism. "Can I see?" He handed it to her. Her small fingers, which he knew were surprisingly strong and deft, turned the box over and over. She didn't try to force anything. She just watched, her head tilted as if listening to it. She traced the lines of the gears with her finger. "It's like a little engine," she murmured. "Everything has to work together." She spent 5 minutes in silent concentration, turning a dial here, sliding a pin there. Alistair watched, fascinated. He saw the same focused intelligence she had displayed with his car. Then, with a series of soft, satisfying clicks, the final gear disengaged and the box sprang open. Lily beamed and handed it back to him. "There," she said simply. Alistair stared at the open box, then at her. How did you do that?" "I just followed the path," she said. "My daddy taught me how to read schematics. He said everything mechanical is like a story. You just have to find the beginning, and it will lead you to the end." They sat in silence for a moment. "Your father, he taught you a lot," Alistair said carefully. Lily's smile softened into something more wistful. "He was the smartest person in the world," she said. "He could fix anything. Cars, toasters, broken toys. He once fixed our neighbor's washing machine with a paperclip and a rubber band. He said people throw away too many good things just because one little part is broken." "He sounds like a great man," Alistair said, the words feeling inadequate. "He was," Lily said, her voice quiet. "I miss him." An ache, sharp and unfamiliar, bloomed in Alistair's chest. It was guilt, raw and undiluted. He had spent his life surrounded by people who measured a man's worth by his net income. Daniel Shepherd had no net income to speak of, yet his legacy, his wisdom, his kindness was alive and vibrant in this small child. What would his own legacy be? A collection of assets? A name on a building? "Lily," he began, not knowing what he was going to say next, but he was interrupted. "Lily, it's time to go." A woman was walking towards them from the park entrance. She was slender, with tired lines around her eyes but a posture of resilient strength. Sarah Shepherd. As she got closer, she saw Alastair. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. She had seen him before. He was the man from the ridiculously expensive car that had been parked outside her building for hours a few nights ago. "Who is this?" she asked Lily, her voice polite but with an edge of steel. "Mom, this is Alastair," Lily said brightly. "His car broke down the other day, and I helped him. And he had a puzzle box, and I fixed that too." Sarah's gaze shifted to Alastair, and he saw a flash of recognition and dawning comprehension. She was putting the pieces together. The broken-down rich man, the anonymous charity, and now this man, coincidentally in the park with her daughter. Her expression hardened. "We need to go," she said, taking Lily's hand. "It was nice to meet you," she said to Alastair, but her tone made it clear it was anything but. She pulled Lily away, leaving Alastair sitting alone on the bench with his open, empty puzzle box. He had wanted to get involved, to get his hands dirty. And he had. But he had only managed to make things worse. He hadn't just been rejected, he was now viewed as a threat, a predator. He watched them walk away, a mother's fierce, protective arm around her daughter, and felt a profound sense of isolation that no amount of money could ever fill. He had opened the puzzle box, but the real mystery, how to fix the damage he had caused, seemed more unsolvable than ever. The encounter in the park gnawed at Alastair. Sarah Shepherd's suspicion was a wall he couldn't seem to breach. He knew that any direct approach would be met with hostility. He had to understand the problem before he could hope to fix it. That meant understanding Daniel Shepherd, not as a case file, but as a man. He decided to start with Marcus Thorne. He summoned his COO to his office under the pretext of reviewing quarterly performance. Marcus arrived, impeccably dressed, radiating an aura of sleek, predatory confidence. He was the kind of man who used words like synergy and optimization without a trace of irony. After 15 minutes of corporate jargon, Alastair changed the subject. "Marcus," he said, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers. "I was reviewing some old personnel files from the Sterling Auto acquisition. An interesting case came up, a mechanic named Daniel Shepherd. Do you remember him?" Marcus's smile didn't falter, but Alastair, a master at reading the subtle tells of a negotiation, saw a flicker in his eyes, a momentary tightening of the jaw. "The name is vaguely familiar, Alastair," he said smoothly. "Sterling has hundreds of employees. I can't be expected to remember every mechanic." "This one you might," Alastair pressed, his voice deceptively casual. "He was terminated for insubordination. He sent you a memo. Something about faulty brake pads." The smile finally vanished from Marcus's face, replaced by a look of wary defensiveness. "Ah, that one. The crank. Yes, I remember now. A classic case of an employee with a persecution complex. He was convinced we were cutting corners, that the sky was falling. His data was flawed. His conclusions were hysterical. He was a disruptive influence on the shop floor. Firing him was a simple matter of operational efficiency." "His data was flawed?" Alastair asked, keeping his gaze level. "I read the memo. It seemed quite detailed. It included metallurgical analysis, stress test projections. It didn't read like the work of a crank." "He was a mechanic, Alastair, not an engineer," Marcus scoffed. "He was playing outside of his league. We had our own internal engineers review the product. They signed off on it. The product line met all industry safety standards. Shepherd was simply wrong. End of story." But it wasn't the end of the story. Alastair knew Marcus. He knew how he operated. Meeting industry standards was not the same as producing a quality product. It was the bare minimum, the line you walked to avoid lawsuits. "Pull the records," Alastair said, his voice now cold and devoid of any pretense. "I want every internal report on those brake pads. I want all customer complaints, warranty claims, and any settlement agreements related to brake failure in vehicles serviced with Sterling parts for the last 5 years. I want it on my desk by the end of the day." Marcus's face paled slightly. "Alistair, that's a massive undertaking. It's dredging up ancient history. It will divert significant resources." "Then divert them," Alistair cut him off. "End of the day, Marcus." The COO left the office, his usual confident swagger noticeably absent. Alistair knew he had rattled him. While he waited for the data, Alistair went deeper. He had Evelyn track down Daniel Shepard's former supervisor at Sterling, a man named George Riley, who had since retired and moved to a small town upstate. Alistair called him personally. At first, George was guarded, reluctant to talk about his former employer. But Alistair persisted, explaining that he was conducting a historical review and that George's input was vital. "Danny Shepard?" George said, his voice crackling over the phone. "Yeah, I remember Danny. Best damn mechanic I ever had. He had a feel for engines, you know. A real artist. He could diagnose a problem by the sound it made, the way it vibrated. The new kids, they just plug in a computer. Danny listened. "Tell me about his termination," Alistair said. There was a long sigh on the other end of the line. "That was a bad business," George said, his voice dropping. "He found something wrong with those Series 8 brake pads. Said the composite material was no good, that it would crack under high-stress heat. He showed me. He ran his own tests in the shop after hours. He was right. The things were garbage." "So why was he fired?" "He wouldn't let it go. I told him, 'Danny, you've done your part. You've told management. It's on them now.' But that wasn't his way. He said it wasn't right, that people could get hurt. He went over my head. Straight to that slick suit, Thorne. Next thing I know, corporate security is walking him out with his tools in a cardboard box. They told us he was a troublemaker. It broke his spirit, that did. He was never the same after." After he hung up, Alistair sat in his silent office, the city glittering below him. He was piecing together a portrait of a man of immense talent and unshakable integrity. A man his company had labeled a crank and thrown away like a broken part. The documents from Marcus arrived late that afternoon. It was a mountain of data, thousands of pages of reports and spreadsheets. Alistair cleared his schedule for the next 2 days. He locked himself in his office and he read. He read until his eyes burned. It was all there, buried in the jargon and the legalese. A statistically significant uptick in warranty claims for brake-related issues. A dozen minor traffic incidents where drivers reported brake fade or soft pedal. Each incident had been quietly settled by Finch Consolidated's legal department, with non-disclosure agreements signed. No single incident was big enough to raise a red flag, but taken together, the pattern was undeniable. Daniel Shepard had been right. They were garbage. And Marcus Thorne had known it. He hadn't just fired a whistleblower, he had actively covered it up, prioritizing profit margins and his own career over the safety of his customers. The full weight of it settled on Alistair. This wasn't just a matter of corporate negligence. This was a profound moral failure, and it had his name on it. Every car on the road with those brake pads was a liability, a potential tragedy waiting to happen. And the man who had tried to stop it had died of a broken heart, leaving his family to struggle while the executive who silenced him was promoted to the top of the corporate ladder. Alistair thought of Lily, on the swings, laughing. The innocence of that sound was a searing indictment of the world he had built. He knew he couldn't just fix this with a product recall. This wasn't a mechanical problem anymore. This was a human one. He needed to fix the entire machine. Alistair knew his next move was fraught with risk. He needed an ally, someone on the inside who wasn't part of Marcus Thorne's network of loyalists. He needed an engineer, someone who could validate Daniel Shepard's original findings with unimpeachable authority. His search led him to a woman named Dr. Aris Thorne, a materials scientist in Finch Consolidated's R&D division. She was brilliant, meticulous, and had a reputation for being fiercely independent. She also happened to be Marcus Thorne's estranged sister, a fact that added a layer of dramatic complexity Alistair couldn't ignore. He requested a private meeting. Aris was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her early 40s with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She regarded Alistair with a cool, professional curiosity. "Mr. Finch," she began, "your summons was rather cryptic. How can R&D be of service?" Alistair didn't waste time. He laid out the files on his conference table. Daniel Shepard's original memo, the warranty claims, the settlement agreements. "Dr. Thorne," he said, "I have reason to believe that for the past 5 years, a subsidiary of this company has been knowingly selling a dangerously defective product. I need you to confirm it." Aris's professional demeanor wavered as she recognized the product line. She picked up Shepard's memo, her eyes flying across the pages. She saw the raw data, the amateur but insightful analysis. "I remember hearing whispers about this," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "My brother, Marcus, he buried it." He called the mechanic a disgruntled employee. "The mechanic was right," Alistair said. "I need you to prove it. I need a full, independent analysis off the books. No one can know you're doing this, especially not your brother. Can you do it?" Aris looked at him, her gaze analytical, searching. She was weighing the risks. This was an act of corporate treason. If Marcus found out, he would destroy her career. "Why?" she asked. "Why now? This happened years ago. Why are you digging it up?" Alistair hesitated. He couldn't very well explain that his entire moral awakening had been prompted by a 9-year-old girl in a yellow raincoat. "Let's just say a new piece of evidence has come to light that has made the situation untenable," he said. "I am trying to correct a mistake, a very serious mistake." Aris was silent for a long moment. "My brother and we don't see eye to eye," she said finally. "His ambition has always overshadowed his ethics. If what you're saying is true, then this goes beyond a simple mistake. I'll do it, but I'll need access to the original manufacturing specs and a sample from the production line." Over the next week, Alistair and Aris operated like spies within his own company. He used his executive authority to requisition the necessary materials under false pretenses, burying the requests in a flurry of other projects. Aris worked after hours in her lab, replicating Daniel Shepard's tests and running her own, more sophisticated analysis. During this time, Alistair found he couldn't stay away from the park. He didn't approach Lily or Sarah. He just sat on his bench, a silent observer. He learned their routine. He saw Sarah arrive, her face etched with fatigue from her diner shift, and watch her daughter play with a fierce, loving attention. He saw the simple, unadorned affection between them, a shared joke, a quick hug. It was a world of genuine connection, so different from his own sterile existence of scheduled calls and transactional relationships. He began to see the city differently, not as a map of his assets, but as a collection of human lives. He saw the struggles, the small joys, the resilience. He was a ghost in their world, invisible, but for the first time, he was seeing. One afternoon, he saw Lily sitting by herself near the pond, throwing breadcrumbs to the ducks. She looked sad. He felt an irrational pull to go to her, to ask what was wrong. He stayed put, but the image of her solitary figure stayed with him. He later found out from Evelyn that it was the anniversary of her father's death. The knowledge was a physical blow. He was a universe away from being able to offer any comfort. He was the cause of her family's pain, the shadowy figurehead of the machine that had chewed up and spat out her brilliant father. The guilt was a constant, heavy companion. A week after their first meeting, Aris Thorne called him. "I'm done," she said, her voice grim. "It's worse than we thought. The composite material they used was a cheap knockoff of the one in the original design specifications. It loses its structural integrity after only a few thousand heat cycles, especially in colder climates. Under a hard stop, it doesn't just fail, it can shatter. It's not just defective, it's a death trap. Daniel Shepard wasn't just right. He was understating the danger." Alistair felt a cold dread spread through him. This was no longer a theoretical risk. It was a certainty. There were thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of cars on the road that were ticking time bombs. "Thank you, Aris," he said, his voice hoarse. "You've done this company, and its customers, a great service." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to fix it," he replied. "The right way." But even as he said the words, he knew that Marcus would not make it easy. His brother was a cornered animal now, and cornered animals were the most dangerous. He had poked the hornet's nest, and the fallout was about to begin. The first sign of trouble was subtle. An anonymous tip was leaked to a financial blogger that Alistair Finch was losing his grip, spending company resources on a personal vendetta against a top executive. The company's stock dipped a few points. Then, the pressure became more direct. Marcus requested a meeting with Alistair and two of the most powerful members of the board of directors. They met in the main boardroom, the air thick with tension. "Alistair," one of the board members, a grizzled old titan of industry named Richard, began, "Marcus has brought some disturbing things to our attention. He says you're waging a campaign against him, pulling up old files, disrupting operations, all based on the word of some disgruntled mechanic who was fired years ago." "The disgruntled mechanic was a hero," Alistair said calmly, "and he was right. I have a report from Dr. Aris Thorne that proves, scientifically and without a shadow of a doubt, that the Series 8 brake pads are lethally defective. Marcus knew about it, and he covered it up." Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "This is an outrage. My own sister conspiring against me. She's always been jealous of my success. Alistair is being manipulated. A full product recall based on this flimsy, ancient evidence would cost this company hundreds of millions of dollars. It would be catastrophic for our shareholders." "What is the cost of a human life, Marcus?" Alistair asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "What is the cost of letting a family drive their child to school, believing they are safe when we know they are not?" "This is business, not philosophy," Marcus retorted. "We handle the liability through our legal department. That's what they're for. It's a calculated risk." "There are some risks you do not calculate," Alistair said, standing up. "I am ordering a full, immediate recall of the Series 8 brake pads. I am opening a full investigation into the cover-up. And I am recommending to this board that Marcus Thorne be terminated, effective immediately." The room erupted. The board members were in shock. This was a coup. Marcus was livid, his face a mask of fury. "You can't do this," he snarled. "I have the support of this board. They know what's at stake." Richard, the old board member, looked at Alistair, his expression grim. "Alistair, think about what you're doing. The scandal, the stock price. It could ruin us." "If we don't do this, we are already ruined," Alistair said. "We just don't know it yet. We've lost our way. We've become a company that values profit over people. I will not lead a company like that. If you stand with Marcus, then you can have my resignation as well." He had thrown down the gauntlet. He was risking everything. The company his father had built, his fortune, his entire identity. He looked at the faces of the men in the room, men he had known his whole life, and saw only calculations and risk assessments. He had never felt more alone. The board meeting ended in a stalemate, a tense, simmering ceasefire. Alistair knew he had only bought himself a little time. Marcus and his allies on the board would be working furiously behind the scenes to consolidate their power and force him out. The corporate machine, the one he had commanded for so long, was now turning on him. That night, unable to face the suffocating opulence of his penthouse, he drove. He didn't know where he was going, but his hands guided the Rolls back to that familiar, dreary street. He parked across from the brick apartment building and just watched. He felt a desperate need to connect with the one pure, uncomplicated thing in his life. Lily. But he had no right. He was toxic, a harbinger of chaos. And he was about to prove it. The next morning, Sarah Shepherd was served with an eviction notice. The reason cited: her repeated refusal of financial assistance from the building's charitable fund, which was a violation of a newly invented and entirely fictitious clause in her tenancy agreement. It was a baseless, cruel, and legally dubious maneuver, but it had the desired effect. It was a message, sent directly to Alistair from Marcus. I know your weakness, and I will not hesitate to crush it. Alistair saw the notice. A copy had been anonymously emailed to him by someone in the management company, likely on Marcus's orders. And he felt a surge of white-hot fury, followed by a wave of cold, sickening dread. He had tried to protect them, to keep his toxic world from touching their fragile one. Instead, he had painted a target on their backs. He had brought the full, crushing weight of his corporate war down on this innocent family. He had to warn them. He had to explain. There was no more hiding. No more distance. He drove to their apartment, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. He walked up the 3 flights of stairs, the hallway smelling of dust and boiled cabbage. He stood outside apartment 3B, his hand raised to knock. And for the first time in his adult life, Alistair Finch was truly terrified. He knocked. The sound echoed in the quiet hallway. He heard movement inside, and then the door opened a few inches, held by a brass security chain. Sarah Shepherd's face appeared in the gap. Her eyes, already shadowed with fatigue, were now wide with alarm and anger. When she saw who it was, her expression hardened into a mask of pure contempt. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice low and fierce. "Please," Alistair said, his own voice sounding strained and unfamiliar. "Mrs. Shepherd. Sarah. I need to talk to you. It's urgent. It's about the eviction notice." The mention of the notice made her flinch. "How do you know about that?" she whispered, her eyes darting nervously down the hall. "You did this. This is your fault." "Yes," Alistair said, the admission tasting like ash. "And no, it's complicated. Please just give me 5 minutes. For Lily's sake." The mention of her daughter's name was a calculated risk, but it was the only leverage he had. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the fierce maternal instinct warring with her deep distrust of him. After a long, agonizing moment, she unlatched the chain and opened the door. 5 minutes, she said, her voice like ice. The apartment was small, meticulously clean, but threadbare. The furniture was old, but well cared for. There were drawings taped to the walls, colorful, cheerful explosions of a child's imagination. In the corner, there was a small, tidy workbench covered with tools, a shrine to a man he was beginning to feel he knew. Lily was sitting at the small kitchen table, drawing. She looked up when he entered, her face breaking into a bright, innocent smile. "Alistair, you came to visit." The sound of her happy voice was like a knife in his gut. "Hi, Lily," he said, managing a weak smile. "Lily, honey, why don't you go to your room for a little while?" Sarah said, her tone gentle but firm. "Mr. Finch and I need to talk about some grown-up things." Lily's smile faded, replaced by a look of concern, but she obeyed without question, gathering her crayons and disappearing into a small adjoining room. Sarah closed the door behind her, then turned to face Alastair, her arms crossed over her chest. She was a cornered lioness, ready to defend her cub to the death. "Start talking," she commanded. And so he did. He told her everything. He didn't make excuses or try to soften the blow. He told her who he was, the CEO of Finch Consolidated. He told her about his company acquiring Sterling Auto Parts. And then, the hardest part. He told her about her husband, Daniel. He told her about the memo, about the faulty brake pads, about how Daniel had been right and had been fired for his integrity. He told her about Marcus Thorne and the cover-up, and his own recent discovery of the truth. He watched her face as he spoke. He saw disbelief turn to dawning horror, then to a deep, gut-wrenching grief as the injustice of her husband's last months became clear. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Her pride was a fortress. "So my husband didn't just die," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "He was destroyed. By your company. By you." "I didn't know," Alistair said softly. "I swear to you, I didn't know until a few weeks ago. And ever since I found out, I've been trying to make it right." "Make it right?" she spat, her voice dripping with scorn. "By sending us groceries we don't want? By paying our rent like we're some charity case? By getting us kicked out of our home? The eviction is from Marcus Thorne," Alistair explained, his own voice rising with desperate urgency. "He's trying to stop me from exposing him. He's using you, using Lily, to get to me. I came here to tell you that I will fix this. I will not let him hurt you. I'll find you a new place to live, a better place. I'll take care of everything." Sarah let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Oh, you'll take care of it. The great Alastair Finch will wave his magic money wand and make all our problems disappear. Don't you understand? You are the problem. Your money, your power, your whole world. It's a poison. It ruined my husband, and now it's ruining our lives. I don't want your help. I don't want your money. I want you to leave. Leave us alone." She was shaking, her face pale, her hands clenched into fists. He had laid his soul bare, confessed his company's sins. And it wasn't enough. The chasm between their worlds was too wide, the damage too deep. He had broken this family, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put them back together again. The door to Lily's room creaked open. Both adults turned to look. Lily was standing there, her face streaked with tears, a well-loved, slightly ragged teddy bear clutched in her hand. She had clearly heard everything. "You made my mommy cry," she said, her voice small and accusing, directed at Alastair. And you were mean to my daddy." Alastair felt his heart shatter. The one person in the world who had looked at him with simple, unvarnished kindness now looked at him with the pain of betrayal in her eyes. "Lily, he started, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say? "I'm sorry my company destroyed your father's spirit and inadvertently led to his death. I'm sorry my attempt to atone for this has resulted in you being evicted from your home." The platitudes of apology were useless in the face of such a monumental wrong. It was Lily who spoke next, her voice filled with a wisdom that was far beyond her years, a wisdom forged in the quiet logic of her father's workshop. "My daddy always said," she sniffled, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, "you can't fix a machine by ignoring the broken parts. You have to take it all apart, even the scary bits inside. And then you have to put it all back together again, the right way, even if it's hard." She looked from her mother's angry, tear-stained face to Alastair's lost, guilt-ridden one. "You're both just yelling about the broken parts," she said. "You're not fixing it." Her simple, profound words hung in the air, a truth so obvious and so powerful that it silenced the adult rage and guilt. She was right. Sarah was lost in her righteous anger, and he was lost in his ineffectual remorse. They were just staring at the wreckage. Lily's words were a schematic, a blueprint for what had to happen next. It wasn't about money or apologies. It was about dismantling the entire broken machine and rebuilding it. "She's right," Alistair said, his voice quiet but filled with a new, unwavering certainty. He looked at Sarah, not as a charity case or an obstacle, but as an equal, a fellow victim of the same broken system. He can't be allowed to get away with this, not just Marcus Thorne, the whole system that enabled him. The system that I built. I am going to take it apart, and I will need your help. Sarah stared at him, her anger giving way to a weary confusion. My help? What could I possibly do? You can tell your story, Alistair said. You can give a face to the numbers on the page. You can tell the world about Daniel Shepard, the man, not the disgruntled employee. You can help me honor him. Properly. He saw a flicker of something new in her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. It was the faintest glimmer of a shared purpose, born from a shared pain. He had come to their apartment to save them, but as he stood there in that small, humble room, under the clear, unwavering gaze of a 9-year-old girl, he realized the truth. He was the one who needed saving. And this family, the family he had almost destroyed, was the only one who could show him how to fix what was broken. The next 48 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Alistair moved with a speed and decisiveness he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just managing a crisis. He was leading a revolution against his own empire. First, he secured the Shepards. He moved Sarah and Lily out of the apartment and into a suite at a discreet residential hotel under Evelyn's name, ensuring Marcus couldn't reach them. He hired the best tenants' rights lawyer in the city to file a blistering lawsuit against the building's management company for wrongful eviction, creating a legal firewall. Then, he went on the offensive. He convened an emergency, off-site meeting with Aris Thorne and a small, hand-picked team of loyal executives he knew he could trust, people who had been sidelined by Marcus's rise to power. In a secure conference room, he laid out the entire story, presenting Aris's irrefutable scientific report and the mountain of evidence of the cover-up. "We are going to expose this," Alistair announced, his voice ringing with authority. "We are going public. We will announce a full, voluntary recall of the product. We will terminate Marcus Thorne and any executive involved in the cover-up. And we will issue a public, unconditional apology to the family of Daniel Shepard." The executives were stunned. This was corporate suicide. The financial fallout would be immense. "The stock will collapse," one of them stammered. "Our competitors will crucify us." "Let them," Alistair replied, his gaze like steel. "We will survive this by telling the truth. We will be the company that almost failed because it did the right thing. That is a story of strength, not weakness. Our integrity will be our new currency." He then played his final card. He brought in Sarah Shepard. She was nervous, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes were clear and determined. She stood before the small group of powerful executives and she told them about Danny. She didn't talk about brake pads or metallurgical reports. She talked about a man who could spend an entire Saturday fixing a neighborhood kid's bicycle for free. A man who read bedtime stories to his daughter in the voices of all the different characters. A man whose hands were always covered in grease but whose heart was spotless. A man who believed in doing a job right, or not at all. "My husband died because he cared too much," she said, her voice cracking with emotion but never breaking. "Your company told him that caring was a weakness. You rewarded the man who silenced him and punished the man who told the truth. I am not here for your money. I am here for my husband's name. I want his daughter to know that her father was a hero, not a troublemaker." When she finished, there was a profound silence in the room. She had done what Alastair never could. She had taken a corporate scandal and given it a human heart. She had made Daniel Shepard real. One by one, the executives nodded their assent. They were in. The press conference was scheduled for the following afternoon. Alastair knew Marcus would not go down without a fight. He would be leaking his own version of the story, painting Alastair as an unstable, emotionally compromised leader. The battle for the soul of the company would be fought on the front pages of the financial news. The night before the press conference, Alastair found Lily in the hotel suite's living room, sitting on the floor with a large piece of paper and her crayons. "What are you drawing?" he asked, sitting on the floor beside her. It was a strange and unfamiliar position for him. "It's a new car," she said, pointing with a blue crayon. "See? This is the engine, but it's a special engine. It runs on kindness." She had drawn a huge, smiling heart where the engine block should be. "And these pipes," she continued, "they don't carry exhaust. They carry thank yous out into the world." Alastair looked at the drawing, at its beautiful, impossible simplicity. "I think," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that is the best engine I have ever seen." "My daddy would have liked it," she said. "Yes," Alastair agreed. "I think he would have." The press conference was a media circus. The room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing, the air buzzing with speculation. Marcus Thorne was there, sitting in the front row with two of his board member allies, his face a mask of smug confidence. He was there to watch Alastair self-destruct. Alastair walked to the podium, flanked by Sarah Shepard and Aris Thorne. He looked out at the sea of faces, and for a moment, he felt a flicker of the old fear. But then he glanced at Sarah, at her quiet strength, and he thought of Lily's drawing of an engine that ran on kindness. He took a deep breath and began to speak. He didn't read from a prepared statement. He spoke from the heart. He told the whole story, leaving nothing out. He detailed the corporate malfeasance, the cover-up, and his own ignorance. He held up Aris's report and announced the full recall. He publicly fired Marcus Thorne and his co-conspirators. He looked directly at Marcus as he said it, watching the smugness on his face curdle into disbelief and fury. And then, he did the most important thing. "The greatest failure of this company," he said, his voice resonating with conviction, "was not a faulty product. It was a failure of humanity. We had a man of immense talent and integrity in our ranks, and we failed him. His name was Daniel Shepard." He turned and gestured to Sarah. "His wife Sarah is here with me today. We as a company owe an unpayable debt to this family, but we will spend the rest of our days trying to honor his legacy." He then announced the creation of the Daniel Shepard Innovation Grant, a multi-million-dollar fund dedicated to supporting and funding brilliant, overlooked mechanics, engineers, and inventors who put safety and integrity before profit. He also announced the formation of the Shepard Foundation, a non-profit, to be run by Sarah Shepard if she would accept, dedicated to providing affordable automotive repairs and technical training in low-income communities. The room was stunned into silence, then erupted into a frenzy of questions. Alastair ignored them. He had said all he needed to say. He helped Sarah from the stage, and they walked out of the room, leaving the chaos behind them. As predicted, the company's stock plummeted the next day. Alastair lost billions on paper. His name was dragged through the mud in the financial press. His old world, the world of cocktail parties and sycophants, turned its back on him. He was a pariah, and he had never felt happier. 6 months later, the late afternoon sun streamed through the large, clean windows of the brand-new garage. The sign outside read, "Shepard Auto Foundation, First Branch." The place was bright, busy, and filled with the cheerful noise of honest work. The air smelled of coffee and clean grease. Sarah Shepard, looking 10 years younger, her face free from the lines of constant worry, moved through the garage with the confident air of a manager, a clipboard in her hand. At one of the service bays, a vintage Rolls-Royce, the Monarch, was up on a lift. Underneath it, two figures were working. One was tall, dressed in oil-stained jeans and a simple t-shirt. The other was small, in a custom-made child's jumpsuit, a smudge of grease on her nose. "See?" Lily said, pointing to a bolt on the transmission casing. "It just needed a little adjustment. You were trying to force it." Alistair Finch backed out from under the car on a creeper and sat up. He looked at the wrench in his hand as if it were a foreign object he was still learning how to use. He looked at the grease under his fingernails, a sight that would have horrified him a year ago. He looked at Lily's serious, focused face, the face of a master teaching her apprentice. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached his eyes. "You're right," he said. "I was trying to force it." He looked across the garage at Sarah, who caught his eye and smiled back. In that shared glance was a world of understanding, of shared loss and shared redemption. They were a strange, unlikely family, forged in the wreckage of a broken system. Lily tightened the bolt with a small wrench, giving it a final, satisfying tug. "There," she declared. "All fixed." Alistair looked around the garage, at the people being helped, at the young mechanics being trained, at the hopeful, purposeful energy of the place. He looked at the family he had found, and he started to laugh. It wasn't the condescending bark of a man who thought he was above it all. It was a deep, joyous, heartfelt laugh. The laugh of a man who had taken everything apart, down to the scary bits inside, and had finally, with a little help, put it all back together again. The right way.